It's another time when we bring you In the News, a personality program where we bring personalities to talk on issues that have made news headlines. Welcome to In the News from Voice of Nigeria, Abuja. My name is Godwin Oka. You can listen to this program if you go to our website of www.von.go.ng or the aspect where you can reach us through the apps you can go through TuneIn Radio, Simple Radio, and Radio Garden. I have a special guest in this edition of In the News. He is the Nigerian Honorable Minister of Justice and the Attorney General of the Federation. He is Abubakar Malami, son and CON, son.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure having you
My
with
pleasure.
us in the news.
My pleasure.
The Nigerian Ministry of Justice is the full legal arm of the government in Nigeria. It's saddled with the sole responsibility of bringing to bear cases before the judiciary that are initiated or assumed by the government. The man who is in charge of this laudable ministry is the minister who doubles as the Attorney General of the Federation, Mr. Abubakar Malami, son, CON. He was born on the 17th of April 1967 in Birnin Kebbi State, northwest Nigeria. Mr. Malami is an astute lawyer with wealth of experience that spread across the globe. He is an alma mater of the Usman Danfodio University, Sokoto, Northwest, and University of Maiduguri in the Northwest. He was appointed to this position of leadership in Nigeria in 2015 by President Muhammadu Buhari. Honorable Minister, once again, welcome to In the News.
Thank you very much. Most
We'll
grateful.
just take off by wanting to know, this is the last lap of this administration. Listeners and viewers will want to know what have been the efforts of this your organization in terms of the mandate given to you. How has you fared in your mandate in Nigeria?
Well, if you want to assess the impact of the justice sector, which indeed constitute the body in which the Federal Ministry of Justice can best be situated, you have to look at it from three dimensions. The effect and impact as it relates to the legislative engagement, the effect and impact as it relates to judiciary, and above all, the effect and impact as it relates to the executive. So with that concept in mind, the question is, what is it that as a government we have done differently under the leadership of President Muhammadu Buhari as it relates to legislative engagement? First, we come to realize that for whatever you do, there is need for legislative framework, both in terms of putting in place the necessary structures, in terms of enforcement of the law to achieve what you want to achieve. And then, as you rightly know, the fight against corruption constitutes one of the pillars on the basis of which this administration has taken a decision to focus itself. So in that respect, we come to realization of the fact that there is need for us to bring about effective legislative measures that will now translate to the fight against corruption.
Okay.
If you want to look at it from the further perspectives of security, for example, the position is equally clear that as at the time we came around, Nigerian state was battling with Boko Haram in the in the northeast, and then in the south, MEND, and pipeline vandalizations, among others. A lot of challenges all over the Federation. To such an extent.
We'll come to
Yes.
security.
Yes.
I want us to just keep on, our line of thought. You
Okay.
mentioned the issue of EFCC and in terms of all the efforts in that direction. Now, what will you say as regards, especially money laundering or those elements who are taking our money stashed abroad? I know there were some recoveries, and there are setting requirements as regards those monies. Listeners want to know your effort as ensuring that the conditions that were given as regards such funds are being taken care of, especially in investing in the Nigerian economy?
You see, arising equally from the need to ensure that the looted assets were indeed recovered, we equally took steps to strengthen our laws. So, with that in mind, we look at the challenges, identified them, and came up with Money Laundering Prevention and Prohibition Act 2022. With the Money Laundering Prevention Act 2022 in place, and some other mutual collaboration at the international level, the first success in terms of recovery that was recorded by the federal government was the recovery of $322 million from Switzerland, looted assets. But then, arising from our international understanding, we committed ourselves to the transparency and accountability relating to the deployment of these resources. So, what is it that we did in terms of ensuring transparency, accountability? Was to target the poverty and look towards the direction of elimination of poverty in our system. And that was what gave rise to what we had. That was what gave rise to what eventually set into our system as a social investment program. You had the N-Power, medium and small scale enterprises. You have school feeding programs. You have public works program. All of the things, the $322 million, by our understanding with the international community, was to be deployed in that respect. And here we are today. There has never been in history a government in Nigeria that addressed the issue of poverty by way of touching the lives of the poor directly, as much as has been recorded by this government. And that eventually was what translated into the Ministry of Humanitarian and Disaster Management, among others. And here we are today, that rising from that, a lot of other interventions came about through the intervention of the government. So the international community was happy that the government of President Muhammadu Buhari had no issues on refutation as it relates to the accountability and transparency of the system. And then we now embarked on the second phase of recovery, which eventually resulted in the recovery of $311 million that was recovered from US and Jersey, island of Jersey. And what happened eventually? We had a common understanding, common agreement with the international community that had this money repatriated, that these monies were to be deployed in the infrastructural development in the nation. And then that money was deployed in the execution of the Kano, Abuja highway, Lagos Ibadan expressway, and Second Niger bridge. So in essence, our focus, our drive is not only about the fight against corruption, but imbibing the spirit of accountability, transparency, and translating into the national good governance arrangement arising from the recovery. So when we now put in place the law that will assist us in administration of criminal justice and indeed an Order 6, the Administration of Criminal Justice Act and Order 6 translated into speedy determination of cases. When we put in place Money Laundering Prevention and Prohibition Act 2022, it eventually translated to international recovery. The international recoveries made equally translated into the infrastructural development and the fight against poverty, among others. So that indeed is a spirit of good governance as far as the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari is concerned.
Minister, we'll take a break. When we return, we'll be talking on other areas of achieved, because you've just mentioned the fact that EFCC has done so much in convicting 3,000 and so much other facts we've brought up there. We'll talk about the area of jurisprudence in terms of activities as regards quick dispensation and other areas. If you're just joining us, the program is in the news coming to you from Voice of Nigeria. We are right in the office of the Attorney General of the Federation and the Minister of Justice. He's been talking to us on most of his achievement in the ministry. Honourable Minister, once again, welcome to In the News.
Thank you.
You've talked of some reforms in the judiciary. What are you doing? Especially, we have a situation where sometimes elections are coming on, post-elections, you see, or even before elections, you see contradiction, courts giving contradictions in the same issues. It could be here in Abuja, another in maybe Calabar and all that. In your reforms, what are you doing to ensure that some of these are kept?
Well, in terms of judicial reforms generally, our strategy was multifaceted. First, there is no way you can have effective judicial reforms associated with democracy and democratic process without having in place an effective legislation. So over time, we come to realize the lapses in the system and the need to address the challenges that have manifested arising from those lapses. So the starting point was to look at the Electoral Act. And on that account, we came up with Electoral Act 2022, which in its spirit and context had indeed accommodated lifetime experiences that have been witnessed in our electoral system with a particular regard to challenges, accommodate technological advancements that set into the process, all targeted at the possibility of elimination of not only delay, but indeed the elimination of inadequacies associated with the system. So it has proven to be an effective tool, taking into consideration what manifested in the in the subsequent elections. For example, the elections that had taken place in Osun had proven a point that incumbency is no longer a major factor, but indeed the votes of the people count. Taking into consideration an incumbent governor was indeed displaced by an opposition party at a time when the ruling party at the national level is indeed the APC. If you take into consideration of what happened in Anambra and other jurisdictions, the implication of the Electoral Act is people are now having who they want as their leader. And it is no longer business as usual, whereby the imposition of the ruling party now matters for the purpose of who comes around as the leader of the people. Again, if you look at the Electoral Act from the point of the judiciary, a lot of innovations were put in place that now translated into speedy determination of cases. Before 2015, 2019, we were only being witnesses to a situation whereby free election matters, matters associated with nomination of candidates for the contest of election, last in the Supreme Court for over 10 years. If I'm not mistaken, as I'm talking to you, there are 2011 free election matters that are still pending at the Supreme Court. So with that in mind, with that consideration in mind, we realize the need to be regulated by time, and that the time factor element is now factored into the electoral process, into the Electoral Act, to the extent that, for example, pre-election matters must be concluded within 180 days. It was an innovation that now ensures at the end of the day that cases are determined in good time. Again, the prompt loading arrangement. Prompt loading arrangement is an arrangement whereby whatever document you want to put across for consideration of the court, judicial system in determination of your free election matters must be presented before the court and shared among the contending parties. That has equally works wonders in terms of speedy determination of cases. So fundamentally, what I'm trying and laboring to state is the fact that both in terms of the quality of democracy and by way of people having who they want and speedy determination of cases, new and deployment of technology in that respect, new innovations set into our electoral process and democratic process as well. So you'll agree with me arising from the fact that one, the count of the votes of the people count. Two, cases are speedily determined. And then three, indeed, people have who they want as the leader. Deployment, the technology is as well deployed in the process of election to ensure at the end of the day that the votes of the people count. New innovations set into the system that had indeed added quality onto what we are doing through democratic process.
Okay, Honorable Minister, you did mention the area of security where you were alluding to, before this administration came on board, and there is still this feeling, some Nigerians believing that there are no quick dispensation as peculiar to those who may be arrested that are relevant in terms of terrorism, money laundering. What will you say as regards that?
Well, I do not agree with you in all sincerity as it relates to speedy determination of terrorism cases. But then, for the purpose of understanding the context of the successes recorded, it is not out of place to consider the position before 2015 and juxtaposing same with what prevails now in terms of security situation. The fact remains as at 2015, when we came around as a government under the leadership of President Muhammadu Buhari, about 17 local governments in Borno were in the hands of Boko Haram. But the major area of interest relating to the period under consideration, that is pre-2015 period, was the fact that bombing public places was indeed a daily affair. Our markets on a daily basis, our churches were being bombed on a day with higher degree of recklessness on a daily basis, to such an extent that nobody is at peace. If you see someone coming into a mosque or a church with a black handbag, people start a kind of looking around to be sure that they are safe. Now, as of today, I cannot remember when last we have had an incident of a bomb blast in northeastern part of Nigeria. And even the attacks that were being recorded daily. In fact, the audacity of Boko Haram then could best be described by the fact that Boko Haram came in all the way from Borno down to Kano to indeed inflict heavy casualty at a mosque where over 200 people were killed at a time. We are no longer witnessing that kind of incessant bombings and incessant attacks by the Boko Haram. The fact that Boko Haram are indeed decimated is indeed a clear testimony of the success of what we are doing as a government through a legislative framework. But it is equally important to factor our reaction as a government to security issues through judicial processes and judicial means. When the military were short of military hardware in terms of engagement, the federal government under the leadership of President Muhammadu Buhari acquired Super Tucano aircrafts that were meant to be used in the in the fight against Boko Haram. They were procured, but then we were faced with a challenge. And the challenge is only associations or groups that are declared terrorists could be attacked using Super Tucano by the international conventions and agreement. And here we are, faced with a challenge of Boko Haram, having the weapons at our disposal, the military hardware, but then we could not use it. And that brought about the need for us to now institute a judicial process on account of which, by judicial pronouncement, Boko Haram bandits were declared terrorists. and that now laid foundation for deployment of this military hardware. And then here we are today experiencing daily successes arising from it. Insecurity that constituted a front burner issue as at the time we came around as a government is gradually giving way to peace and security in the country. In Borno, for example, only recently, major political parties were all in Borno, having political rallies peacefully without any incidents. In Yobe, only recently, political parties are there having their political rallies peacefully and coming out of it in peace and in harmony. So, regardless of the way and manner you look at it, our intervention through legislative processes, through judicial processes, and deployment of military hardware has indeed recorded a major success in terms of the engagement as it relates to the security challenges being faced by the government.
Honourable Minister, under your administration, we've seen so much in the area of drug abuse and trafficking, which was as if there was no agency like the NDLA. But under your administration, we've seen tremendous effort. What had been the strategy of this success?
Well, the main strategy is to identify the root cause, attacking the root cause, and having in place a capable captain that can now be deployed in whatever we do. We are a government that do not compromise in the quality and capacity of those that should be saddled with the responsibility. When I told you about over 3,000% enhancement in conviction, it is because, one, we realize the need for having in place effective legislations, having in place captains with capacity, and then deploying the capacity and the legislative framework in doing what we are doing. So, EFCC, we have succeeded in putting in place people with capacity, providing the necessary capacity building, using the necessary laws. NDLEA, we equally succeeded in putting in people with capacity that deployed the desired tactics in attacking the barons as against attack on peddlers, petty, drug peddlers, which had eventually translated into tremendous success. So regardless of the way you look at it, whatever engagement we are going in as a government, whatever engagement we embark upon as a government, first we look at the legislative framework desired that could now stand the test of time. We look at the capacity associated with it and then build the desired capacity to support the legislative framework on the ground.
Honourable Minister, as we round off now, what would you want to be remembered as, at the end of the day, when you leave office? What will specifically be in your mind to be remembered?
Well, I want to be remembered as an Attorney General that has indeed worked extraordinarily hard in the promotion of the public interest as against individual interest. An Attorney General that supported the system, working under the guidance, instructions, and directives of President Muhammadu Buhari to ensure that things are done in line with the necessary processes. Rule of law is indeed applied to the latter within the context permissible by law, and above all, translating the service delivery into good governance.
Thank you, Honourable Minister.
Thank you.
Just been watching and listening to the Honourable Minister of Justice and the Attorney General of the Federation, Mr. Abubakar Malami, San, CON. He's been talking to us, sir. Thank you for being on our program in the news.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And it's here we draw the curtains on this edition of the program. But don't forget, you can still go through our website and listen to this program. If you go through our website of www.von.gov.ng. Other platform where you could reach us, could go through Simple Radio, TuneIn Radio, and Radio Garden through the apps. And if you want to watch this edition of the program, why not go to Facebook and search for Von Newscast? There you watch this edition of the program. My name is Governor Car. Production was by Paul K. Let's do it again same time next week. Bye for now.